it's City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have a bit of a different layout for you. So I've been very inspired watching a lot of different artists who are making art journaling pages on YouTube. And I found one artist in particular and I decided to take her process and adapt it to a scrapbooking page. So the name of the artist is Shira Manor or Manor, I'm not sure. And she made a video that I will link in the description box. And I'm going to be using, as I said, her steps and making it into a scrapbooking page. So of course, some things I do in the same way that she did, and some things I switch up just because we are creating similar but not exactly the same types of artwork. So here is the process, the steps that I followed. I started with a piece of 120-pound smooth white cardstock. I gessoed it, and then I took some scrapbooking paper. You could see one of the strips of paper over to the right. I ripped it into strips, and I used some gel medium to attach those strips down to the page. Once I had the strips glued down, I used some white gesso, and I put a light coat of gesso over the top of those torn pieces of paper. Now I'm adding some cheesecloth to the background. I'm also using gel medium to attach that down, and you can see I'm using the paintbrush to kind of help position it and mold it. Then I got some spackle tape, and it's a mesh tape and it's adhesive on one side, so I didn't even have to glue it. So I was cutting it into pieces and I'm layering them on top of the torn pieces of paper and the cheesecloth. And you can see that I'm concentrating all of the texture in the upper left-hand corner and the lower right-hand corner. I do put a lot of those pieces of mesh down. And my husband was on his way to Home Depot or Lowe's, and I said, "Ooh, please get me some spackle tape." And I told him what I wanted, and he got me a roll that I think will last me forever. So I'm looking forward to getting a lot of use out of that. Now I'm adding some stamping to the background. I'm using StazOn ink in jet black with a Bow Bunny stamp called Newsprint stamp. I also use a Studio Calico stamp, that's those little dots, and I've had that in my stash for a long time. I don't have a name on that. You could really use any background stamps that you have. Now I'm adding some modeling paste to the background. This stencil is made by Dress My Craft and it's called Splatter with Lines. I absolutely love this stencil. I'm using some Crafters Workshop modeling paste. I wanted to mention that a lot of what I'm doing here does get covered up. Enough of it shows that I think it was worth doing, but because this is a scrapbook layout, it's much different from art journaling pages. Art journaling pages also have a focal point. Sometimes it's a sentiment, sometimes it's a stamped image or other image, but for the most part, the backgrounds are visible. Where with scrapbooking layouts, a lot of times the photo and the embellishments cover up a lot of the background. And I'm okay with that. Certainly, you could add less to your scrapbooking layout and cover up less of your background if you want to. That's always an option. So I'm sorry, some of the footage got lost here. What I did was I took some art stones, some small and medium art stones, and I mixed them together with some gesso. It was suggested you could also use gel medium, but I use the gesso, and in the future I think I would use the gel medium because I think I covered up those background pieces of paper a little bit more than I wanted to by adding all the gesso, and I don't think that the gesso really made the art stones stick as well as the gel medium would. So I'm putting extra gesso on here that is continuing to cover up those ripped pieces of paper in the background. And in addition, I would not use the larger art stones. I would just use the smaller ones, or maybe I would just mix some sand in with some gel medium to provide a little bit more texture. But because I'm going to be putting a photo and embellishments on the background, the art stones make the background a little more textured than I prefer it to be. But this is all a learning process, an experiment. I wasn't even going to record this because I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out, but I ended up being glad that I did because I ended up making a page with it. So here I'm using some sprays. This is a Dylusions spray, And I also use some Tattered Angels sprays on this layout, but I mainly chose the Dylusion sprays because I love the intensity of color with Dylusions. So I do a lot of spraying of the background and then adding water. And when I needed a little bit more, I tried to use the overspray that went onto the table. I do dry between each color, and in some cases I use the drying to move the color around the page a little bit. So now I have the blue that I want on the background, and this is also Dylusions, and I'll have the names of the colors in the description box. And I am adding some orange. I felt that the orange and the blue would make a nice color combination. And I'm trying to add the orange in the areas where I don't have any blue. If orange and blue mix together, they will make a brownish color, and I really don't have a problem with that for this layout because this is going to be a water themed, beach themed kind of layout. So I wasn't super worried about there being some brownish tones in there. And if that's something that you would not like to have, you just have to be careful that the colors are never on the page wet at the same time. Now I'm going in with some more blue, and you can see here how I am applying the color and drying it at the same time. And I think it just makes kind of a cool effect when you do that. This is definitely a longer video than I'm used to making, and that's because I did spend a lot more time on the background than I normally do. And then once I'm done making the background, I of course am going to go on to the regular scrapbooking process. It's nice to be able to clean up any overspray or any areas of color that you don't want, and because the background has gesso on it, it makes it easy to do. And I think you can start seeing the texture that's on the background. You can see the mesh, and you could see some of the cheesecloth, and I just love the way the sprays look over those textured areas. I do spend a considerable amount of time building up layers of color, and that just makes the colors more intense, and it makes them look more interesting because instead of just having one layer of color, you have two, and the way that the colors overlap creates so much more interest than if you just have one layer of paint. You can see throughout the process I am using a paintbrush, I'm doing some direct spraying, I am using a paper towel to dull down the color at times, and all of these different methods create different effects on the background. Here I'm adding some splatters. I'm adding the splatters all over, but I'm mainly adding them along the edge of the color, and I like the way it looks when there are splatters that are close to the big areas of color but overlapping into white areas. And I have to say that I really had a lot of fun trying this out. This was one of those backgrounds where I understood that it might not come out in a way that I could use, and so I just kind of let myself go and just experiment, and I really enjoyed that. I'm adding some gesso onto the areas that are a little bit more raised than others, and I'm using a little sponge and I'm just dabbing on some of the gesso on mainly the art stones and also the mesh as well. And this helps you to be able to see the texture. Now I'm adding some watered down white acrylic paint and splattering that around, and so I'm adding the white splatters all over the entire page. I'm mainly concentrating them in the areas of color, but plenty of them go in the center too, and that doesn't matter because it's already white. And here I'm going back in again, and I'm adding a little bit more white gesso again to those raised areas. This is the next day. I came back and I decided that I was going to add some more blue. I wanted to add a little bit of a darker color, and so I pulled out a Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist, and I added the darker color in just a couple of areas. I just wanted there to be a little bit more depth of color in certain spots. I also add another color of orange. This is a Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist. And then I was thinking that it would look really nice if there was a little bit more variation in the orange. So I added a little bit of yellow to the areas that were orange, just in some spots. And then that would make a lighter orange. And you could see though that there's a lot more yellow there. It didn't just blend with the orange. Some of the areas of yellow are still apparent. So I just went in there and blended that together. And now the background is almost done. Just one more time, I'm adding a little bit more gesso on the sponge to those textured areas to highlight the texture a little bit more. The next step in the process is to add some ink to the border. So I am using some, I believe, Vintage Photo Distress ink to the edge, all four edges of this layout. And then once I have all of the edges inked, I was thinking that I wanted to bring a little bit more of the color to the layout as a whole. So I took the dauber and I added a little bit of the brown to a couple of different spots. I didn't want to add a lot. I liked what was in the background, but I also wanted to have the edges tie in with the rest of the layout. And I'm happy with the impact that that color made on the background. And after almost 12 minutes of video, I have finally finished the background. So now this is the photo that I'm going to be using on my layout. And you can see that there's a lot of the same colors that are on the layout. Sometimes I think it's best to have matching colors, and then other times I feel like I want to have contrasting colors with the background. And I think it just depends on the photos and the papers, and I feel like both work. If you have a contrasting color scheme in the background, it tends to highlight the photo, but if it kind of blends and matches, I feel like it makes the photo and the background kind of sing together. So I think it's just a personal preference, and sometimes I try to match the color and sometimes I like to have contrasting colors. In this case, the colors go together. So I am using a very, very old K & Company collection that I love. I love the colors. I have used this for many, many layouts. It's called Tim Coffey Travel. And I have so much of it, and you can see I'm still being stingy and cutting out little strips of paper rather than putting a whole piece of paper where you won't be able to see part of it. So I backed it with some of that brownish paper and then some of the blue paper. And of course here you can see that I'm cutting out the center just in case I need it for something. I just hate to waste these beautiful old K & Company papers. I know that I won't be able to get them anymore. So I'm roughing up the edges of this paper with my scissors, and then I'm using a dauber to apply some of that Vintage Photo ink. Sometimes you just need a really small piece of paper. If I'm making a photo corner or punching out a circle or something, sometimes you just need a little scrap of paper. So I like to save those. And then I'm adding another layer with this orange paper, and I'm inking the edges of that. And that one I don't think I got for some unknown reason. I don't know why. So now that I have all of the papers layered behind my photo, I'm going to rough up those layers a little bit. And I'm just digging in there and kind of smushing and crunching and making the layers look really distressed. And I like the way that distressed look looks with the background that I have there. Now this is where having all those art stones kind of made me reconsider putting the large art stones on the next time. The photo is sitting on top of these little stones, and I just didn't like the way it was sitting on there. So I just rolled some of them off using my hands. I was able to get them off the background, but it's still a little bit bumpy. I attached my photo down on the upper left-hand corner of the page. And now I'm going to be adding some of this net to the background. I include some behind the photo, And then I also put some on the lower right-hand corner. I purchased this several years ago at Michael's, and I see it there often. But I'm sure there are many other places you could get something similar to this. So I thought it was going to be harder to manipulate than it was. I'm just tucking it underneath the photo to kind of keep it in place. And I put a little bit of netting, or maybe not that little, a large piece of netting on the bottom. And now I'm using gel medium to get that to stick down to the paper. And I don't include all the footage of me sticking down the netting, but you could see here that it's all stuck down now. So now I'm taking my dauber and that vintage photo ink, and I'm inking the edges of all of these pieces that I'm going to be including on the layout. I wanted to include these seagulls, and so I'm going to put those kind of in the center of two areas of color. And then I'm going to place all of the other embellishments around the page. On the bottom, there's a piece of chipboard that says "We've arrived," and that was one of those pre-made titles, but I thought it was perfect for this layout. When we were in Martha's Vineyard, we were taking a ferry back to the mainland of Cape Cod, and we wanted to eat at our favorite restaurant, and we knew that it closed at 10 o'clock, so we were really hoping to be able to get back and then get to that restaurant in time. So we were really happy when we got back to Cape Cod and we found our car, because we wanted to zip over to that restaurant. And it turned out that the restaurant was still open and was open long after the posted hours. So we were able to have a delicious meal. We got some Thai food, and the name of the restaurant I remember was Basil Thai Cuisine, I think, and we ate there every year. We loved it. It was just a really simple restaurant in like a little mini strip mall, but the food there was absolutely amazing. So I thought "We've arrived" was perfect because we arrived back in time to have dinner in our favorite spot. You could see that I am spreading the embellishments around the page. I'm layering them. And once I've decided that I'm okay with where I have certain embellishments, I'm attaching them down. I popped up just one of those seagulls so it would look a little bit more dimensional next to his friend or her friend. And I often put foam on the back of embellishments, and then I use some ATG adhesive on the back, and that helps me to stick them down, but also be able to move them around if I'm not thrilled with the placement later on. Once I have everything where I want it, though, I do use some gel medium to attach the elements down. Now, because of the mixed media background, I know that it's going to be a little harder for the embellishments to stick, so the gel medium is a very strong adhesive, and I think it's perfect in this particular case. I'm going to pop up that title, "We've arrived." And I continue to go around the page and use some of that gel medium and get everything arranged. Once that gel medium dries, it's really, really difficult to move items around. So I want to make sure that I'm happy with where everything is. You definitely have a little bit of time before it dries to do a little bit of tweaking, but I generally try to be very, very sure about placement before using gel medium. So I do go around the whole page and I attach everything that's not attached down with some gel medium. I pop up a few things, like for example, this bird gets popped up with a little foam, and that just makes the clusters more interesting because some of the items are more dimensional than others. I just wanted to mention one more time that if you would like to have a background that was a little more visible, you can use a smaller photo, you can use less embellishments, and of course, you could design your page the way that you would want to. Maybe a little bit more of an art journaling style where you don't have too much on the background. I'm using some tape here to attach down the edges of the netting. And then I was thinking there were a couple of places where I could use just a touch more netting. So I cut a little bit more, and now I'm just using some gel glue to attach this down because it's a small piece. I felt that there was a little spot on the top where I needed a little touch of netting. Sometimes I just feel compelled to add certain things. I don't know that anybody else would make the same choice or would notice that there was something missing there, but that's just how my head worked. Now I'm going to add some self-adhesive jewels to the background. I've had these in my stash a long time. I feel that when you look carefully at them, they resemble sand dollars, and they're really sparkly, and they're kind of an iridescent whitish color, so I thought that that would be perfect to add some sparkle, but not a new color to the background. And I don't have them in different sizes, so I'm just adding the one size that I have around the background. And then I'm also adding some Paper Studio adhesive gems. They're a little bit more of a dome, and they are available in different sizes, and they're not very colorful, but if you look carefully at them, there's a little bit of an iridescent shimmer to them. Next, I'm going to add some photo corners to my photo. I use an EK Success photo corner punch, and I use the dauber here, and I ink the edges of the dauber. And that is the same paper that I use for layering underneath the photo. Once I have all the corners inked, I use ATG adhesive and I attach all of them down. And they're a little hard to manipulate sometimes, but I got them all attached down. And now I'm adding a self-adhesive pearl to each of the corners, except for the one where the crab would be covering up the photo corner. And now I'm using these really, really tiny pearls. Some of them are tinier than others. They come in a number of different sizes, but I wanted to just sprinkle some of these around the background as well. I don't add too many of them, but how could I have a beach themed layout and not use pearls when I use pearls on so many of my layouts? So I sprinkle a few around the layout. Some of them are just so tiny I can't even pick them up with my fingers, but I do get some of them down there. And then I'm just fixing up this little shell here, and that completes the layout. Here are some close-ups of the layout. I hope if you like this video, you'll give it a thumbs up. I hope you enjoyed watching this little experiment here. I definitely learned some things I would do differently next time, and some of the things that I really enjoyed about this process. And as I had said, I will put the link to the Shira Manor video that I used many of the techniques from in the description box. I would love to hear your feedback on this video, so please feel free to leave me a comment and let me know what you thought. I hope that everybody has a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.